you could let me know when we're live. Hi. Hi, YouTube. Good morning. Good morning. Now, listen, this is really weird, but we have a number of things happening on the show today. I have to leave my studio early, so the second half of my show is going to be a pre-recorded conversation, an amazing pre-recorded conversation that I have with Imani Gandhi, who is just an amazing attorney and helps us to understand all things Supreme Court and all things reproductive justice. But because of that, and because of the timing of how I have to leave and get in them social justice streets today, I was like, let me just pop on a little early and give the YouTube people their edition of the news, because I know a lot of you now look to this channel as your daily download for news, and I didn't want to leave you hanging. So let's get into it. It's going to feel a little bit like a fire hose. I know some of you have said, Lurie, you talk really, really quickly, and that is true. But you should feel very comfortable using the playback speed controls, because then you can slow me down and you don't even have to worry about it. But let's get into it, because we got a lot to cover. So first things first, the news is newsing, okay? And the law is lawing this week. And as noted by several people on the Twitter sphere, including a brother by the name of Scary Lawyer Guy, it is really hard to explain to people who are not lawyers just how badly the government has been fucking up these investigations and these grand jury proceedings in the James Comey and Letitia James case. So much so that when you have a magistrate judge who's issuing an opinion that has 11 findings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 findings of potential prejudice, that is a really, really bad thing. And that is exactly what white, entitled, and incompetent attorney, white female, white, entitled, and incompetent attorney Lindsay Halligan has found herself in. Basically, there has been a complete failure at the Department of Justice in their ability to prosecute this case. It is extremely embarrassing, and this woman is really about to lose her job. You about to lose your job. I think that's going to be happening because she's certainly not going to be able to work as an attorney anywhere, which is a little scary, because when you think about all the people who are utterly incompetent at their positions who are working as a part of the Trump administration, once it comes time to thinking about whether or not the Trump administration is still going to be administrating, these are people who are going to really be incentivized to do everything that they can to allow Donald Trump to get a third term. They're going to be incentivized to cheat. So we're going to have to watch for this, because if they're anything like Lindsay Halligan, baby, it's going to be a cold day in hell before these people try to give up power. But as noted by Amy Siskind yesterday, it was quite a day for Donald Trump. The House voted 427 to 1. 427 to 1 to release the Jeffrey Epstein files. This is completely a veto-proof majority. And even though head of the House, MAGA Mike Johnson, was very confident that once the House sent this legislation over to the Senate was going to deliberate about it and they were going to talk about it. MAGA Mike Johnson had said, this legislation is not perfect. We're going to need the Senate to make some amendments. And some of the amendments I'm sure he probably wanted was to amend out the provision that says that you got to leave the names in, to amend out the provision that basically said there will be criminal charges for anybody who tries to monkey around with the release. Well, the Senate was like, yeah, MAGA Mike Johnson, we see you, but nah, what we're not going to do is that. Senator Chuck Schumer, who I have been very critical about, even though because one, he is my senator. I voted for him. He is the senator for the great state of New York. I have been very critical about Chuck Schumer because he was not able to keep the Democratic caucus together when it came to the end of the shutdown. Chuck Schumer was very effective yesterday in securing a unanimous consent to just automatically adopt the legislation that they received from the House and send it to the president's desk. I was shooketh. I ain't even going to front. I was very surprised because I was expecting the Senate to receive the legislation, maybe debate about whether or not they were going to even take it up, have conversations, go back and forth, maybe send it back to the House for some amendments, and then the House could do the same thing and then send it back and forth. I really thought they were going to let this thing just sort of linger. The Senate was like, and we approve. So now the legislation that is mandating the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files is basically on its way to Donald Trump's desk. And I know he is shitting fake golden bricks right now because this is a very bad thing. But he also has been screwing up in a whole lot of other places. We learned a lot about this redistricting effort over the course of the past several weeks. And the redistricting effort I'm talking about is the one where Donald Trump basically called the governor of the state of Texas. He be acting like he the president because they are very dictator wannabe like. But Donald Trump, as you may recall, reached out to the head of the Texas legislature, the commander-in-chief for the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, the governor, and basically said, I need you to steal me 5 seats. We need you to do mid-cycle redistricting so that we're able to make sure that even if we lose, we win. Like, that wasn't exactly what he said, but that was kind of like what he said. And so Governor Greg Abbott was like, yes, sir, absolutely, sir. No problem, sir. We'll do that. And triggered off this effort with the elected officials in the state of Texas to basically gerrymander, re-gerrymander, because the state of Texas already had a wholly gerrymandered map, but to basically redraw this map at the mid-cycle point. Now, the mid-cycle point is important because you're supposed to be doing redistricting every 10 years, right? Every 10 years, beginning in a year, ending in one. The reason it's a year ending in one is because the year ending in 0 is the year that we do the census work. And census is what gives us the information that we need to feed into the redistricting effort. But Texas was like, damn that, we're going to be like North Carolina. North Carolina, where their Republican legislature has been redistricting every year since like the 2010s practically, because they have engaged in what the courts have called a surgical precision, an effort that was so precise that they essentially not just knew where the black voters were, they knew where the black voters were, the Latino voters, they knew where the white Democratic voters were. And in the state of North Carolina, for years, they have been using maps and efforts to draw maps that were designed not just to benefit white people, but to benefit Republican white people. And this is something that the state of Texas was also planning to do. In fact, they did, in fact, do it. And as you may recall, this was a problem because the maps that they drew were racially gerrymandered. They were racially gerrymandered to dilute black and brown people's votes. And everybody thought, well, damn, this is just going to, I guess, continue. And that triggered a whole bunch of other states doing the same. So Republican states up and down the seaboard, across the states, the coast, the midland, everywhere, what do you call it, the heartland, they have been trying to ram through these efforts at similarly engaging in mid-cycle redistricting so that they could redraw maps that would then dilute black and brown voters. Well, honey, the courts have stepped in, and a federal judge panel blocked the redistricting map in the state of Texas. And basically what this now means is the state of Texas, which did not go to the voters, the state of Texas went to the legislators, the predominant Republican-led legislature in the state of Texas, and contacted the Republican legislators asking them to support this mid-cycle redistricting, this racially gerrymandered redistricting. And they did that. And now, because of that fact, that triggered Proposition 50 in the state of California. You remember the state of California, where Gavin Newsom has been handing Donald Trump his golden fake-plated ass, like on the Twitters and on the social media spaces for months now. Well, in the state of California, they have a proposition or they have a piece of legislation in their constitution that basically says we're not allowed to do mid-cycle redistricting because the state of California, like many Democratic states, was a part of this effort to have independent redistricting cycles, which would basically mean that everybody's going to have an equitable share of votes. Now, at the same time, Republicans were like, damn that, we taking all the votes that we can get. But in the state of California, they didn't ram this through with the state legislators, the elected officials who operate as a body in the state legislature. They went to the voters. As you will recall, because we talked about this extensively, in the state of California, they had one statewide question on their most recent election. In the most recent election, there was one question that the voters were asked to answer on a statewide basis. There wasn't even any candidates, any people running at the state level. It was only this question at the state level. And the question was basically, it was called Proposition 50. Should we, the state of California, amend our constitution to allow for mid-cycle redistricting if other states like Texas are doing mid-cycle redistricting? The voters went to the polls, and within 2-3 minutes after the polls closed, it was clear that Proposition 50 had won. Now, people were wondering, well, what does this mean? Now that the Texas maps have been struck down, is this going to also mean that Proposition 50 is no longer able to move forward? And according to the man who was in charge of redrawing California's congressional map, his name is Paul Mitchell, he said that the court's decision in the state of Texas doesn't do anything to Proposition 50 because the trigger language was removed in the legislative process as it was clear that Texas was redistricting. So even if their map is invalidated or postponed, the Proposition 50 map in the state of California should stay in place. Y'all, remember when I did this and I gave you the Sealy fingers and I said that Republicans need to know that everything you done to me, already done to you. The jail you dig for me is the one you're going to rot in. Basically, this is karma having its way. I love it. I love it when this happens. So essentially, Texas went through all this effort, showed their hands, and now they're in a situation where they can't use the racist maps that they want to use. They're going to have to use the maps from 2021. And essentially, this bipartisan panel of judges, which included conservatives, at least one of whom I believe was also appointed by Donald Trump, they basically agreed that this was a map designed to destroy black and brown votes, and so what it ain't going to do is happen. So there's that. We also had a situation where a federal appeals court, which also included 2 Trump-appointed judges, you know that Donald Trump has had this defamation lawsuit against CNN because of the term the big lie, and he was like, it's not a big big lie. It's Trump. It's not. Trump doesn't lie. It's not a big lie. Well, he filed a defamation lawsuit against CNN. That shit got smacked down yesterday. You will also recall that the Corporate Public Broadcasting Agency, which I believe, I think it's fair to describe it as a governmental agency. Basically, they are responsible for funding NPR and PBS. And they had decided that they were going to cancel their contracts. And the courts heard the case and basically told the Trump appointees at the Corporate Public Broadcasting Agency, use a bitch, and what you're going to have to do is pay these people their money. So $36 million, that annual contract is going to have to continue to be paid out to NPR. So that is also a win. In New York, there was a judge who dismissed Donald Trump's effort to require that New York law enforcement officers support immigration arrests in state and local courthouses. The courts was like, no, we're not doing that. And so we also, returning back to redistricting, in the state of Indiana, the Senate voted to not engage in a special session. And so the redistricting push that was being pushed by Republicans to get the state of Indiana, did I say Louisiana? I might have said Louisiana. I almost said Louisiana. I meant to say Indiana. Thank you, Amina. Basically, the legislators in Indiana was like, we're not doing this shit with y'all. We're not doing this shit with y'all. So all this effort to engage in mid-cycle redistricting to get more votes for the whites has failed miserably. But also really important news for those of us who are parents, those of us who quite frankly, are having real serious conversations about the nature of religion in this country. Oh, and shout out to all of you who joined us last night in the Sankofa circle that we had all about the rise of white Christian nationalism. We had a special session for 30 people, the first 30 people who signed up. I know a lot of y'all had emailed me because you saw me talk about this in a video clip that posted after the live show. A lot of y'all who listened to the live show who did not, you ain't clicked the button fast enough, so you wasn't one of the 30. We had an amazing discussion last night. It was so good for the soul. It was emotional. It was empowering. We got some marching orders in terms of what we need to do. I'm excited to talk with you more about that. I'm just not going to be able to do all of it today because I'm looking at the clock and we have to be able to sign into my actual live show in like 19 minutes, and I got a lot more to get to. But the reason I'm mentioning the Sankofa circle that we had last night is because we also heard from a federal judge that this effort to require educators to put the 10 Commandments up in their classrooms, that shit has been knocked down by the courts. A federal judge has ordered that the public school districts, again, in the state of Texas, who were required to post the 10 Commandments as a display in their classroom, the federal judge was like, no, there's no way this is not wholly unconstitutional. And according to the report, quote, this was a victory for families who had argued that the posters infringed on their religious freedom. Because think about it. What if I'm Buddhist? What if I'm Muslim? What if I'm atheist? What if I'm Ifa? What if I'm any of these other non-Christian religions, or I practice a form of spirituality? Maybe I'm a hoodoo person. Maybe I'm a voodoo person. I don't necessarily look to the 10 Commandments. What if I look to the laws of Ma'at? And I think about that when I'm thinking about justice. But these white Christian nationalists have been trying everything they could to force this shit down our throats. And the judges was like, no, what you can't do is that. The ruling, going back to the article, from Judge Orlando L. Garcia of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas came after Governor Greg Abbott signed in June a law requiring school districts to display the 10 Commandments in a conspicuous location, which means it couldn't even be like in a closet. It had to be publicly displayed, visibly displayed, where the eyes of like the 10 Commandments are over on you. In each classroom, the ruling applies to 14 public school districts, including ones in Fort Worth, Arlington, and Conroe. And in the ruling, Judge Garcia wrote, quote, it is impracticable, if not impossible, to prevent plaintiffs from being subjected to unwelcome religious displays without stopping school districts from enforcing that law. This is wonderful because what it basically means is white Christian nationalists, do that shit in your own school. Start your own school. Y'all did that before after the Brown versus Board of Education decision when you shut down entire school districts because you didn't want to be educated alongside black people. You shut down entire school districts and reopened private schools within the confines of your white-ass, religious-ass, racist-ass churches. Do that shit. But you know why they don't want to do that? The reason they want this to all happen in public schools is because when that happened after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, when they decided to shut down entire school systems and reopen private schools within the confines of their churches, because if the school is private, you can be as racist as you want to be. They did that, but they could not get access to public dollars to pay for it. So yeah, you can have a religious racist ass school in the name of white Jesus, but you're not going to get the government to pay for it. You're not going to get public school funding to pay for it. That's why they're going after vouchers. That's why they're pushing this sort of school choice situation, because as you you all know, and as I've said multiple times, black people basically created public education, and white people don't like that. The racist white people don't like that. And so this is really important because this is now setting a precedent that says you can try it if you want to. Argue with your mama, argue with white Jesus, but what you're not going to do is have that argument in the public school system. Now, let's move to international news. And I want to play this clip for you, because I haven't talked about this case extensively, certainly not in the course of the past year. It was something that we mentioned right around the time that it happened. But there is a reporter, Jamal Khashoggi. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But he was essentially a reporter who talked a lot about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. I believe he was a Saudi Arabian national, even though he worked for I believe it was the Washington Post, and was based here in the United States. Jamal Khashoggi was essentially kidnapped and murdered, and then had his body dismembered. And according to the reports as produced by the CIA, that happened at the call of Mohammed bin Salman, who you're going to see in this video clip that we're going to play in just a second. And that was essentially a situation where basically this was devastating. It was horrific. And Donald Trump has basically been hosting Mohammed bin Salman. I know I'm messing up his name. I apologize. Hosted him at the White House yesterday. There was a whole dinner last night where all the billionaire bros and Donald Trump and this gentleman who is the leader of Saudi Arabia basically were gathered together talking about all the deals they're going to make. Well, yesterday there was a press conference, and there was an amazing reporter by the name of Mary Bruce, hot woman reporter who is not a WEI. She's definitely worth her salt when it comes to reporting and what the work that she's doing there. She approached Donald Trump in the press conference. She asked a question of him, and well, I think you should listen to it. I'm going to share my screen so you all can watch this. Amina, hold on. Am I sharing the screen? I'm not sharing the screen. Hold on one second. I'm going to share my screen so you all can see this in real time and watch the look on their faces as the reporter is basically like, what is you really doing though? And why did you do it? And why are you even here? But she said it in white woman speak. So let's let her speak for herself. Take a listen.
Mr. President, is it appropriate, Mr. President, for your family to be doing business in Saudi Arabia while you're president? Is that a conflict of interest? And Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office. Why should Americans trust you? And the same to you.
Look at those
So
sparks.
who are you with?
Do
I'm
see
with
that?
ABC News, sir.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Look at
Fake
her.
news. ABC fake news. One of the
But the
worst.
question is
One of the
valid,
worst
sir.
in the business. But I'll answer your question.
She said, but this question is
I have
valid.
nothing to do with the family business. I have left, and when I've devoted 100% of my energy. What my family does is fine.
Lying liar who
They do
lies.
business all over. They've done very little with Saudi Arabia, actually.
Also
I'm
a
sure they
lie.
could do a lot. And anything they've done has been very good. That's what we've done. We've built a tremendous business for a long time. I've been very successful. I decided
Big
to
lie.
leave that success behind and make America very successful.
And they are
I've made
failing
America more
miserably.
successful by far than it ever was, and that it ever could have been, no matter who was president. There would be nobody bringing in $21 trillion.
You
that I can
ain't
tell
bringing
you right
$21
now.
trillion.
As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing
Things
about
happen?
it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like
It's okay,
that.
it's just you ask Mr.
Please,
President,
go ahead.
if you allow me to answer. You know, I feel painful about, the families
I'm
of...
sure you do. Not as painful as
9/11
Jamal's.
9/11 in America. But, we have to focus on reality. Reality based on CIA documents and based on a lot of documents that Osama bin Laden, he used Saudi people in that event for one main purpose, is to destroy this relation, to destroy the American-Saudi relation. That's the purpose of 9/11. So whoever buying that means they are helping Osama bin Laden's purpose of destroying this relation. He knows that strong relation between America and Saudi Arabia, it's bad for extremism, it's bad for terrorism. And we have to approve him wrong and to build our relation, continue developing our relation. It's critical in the safety of the world. It's critical against extremism and terrorism.
This is what we call a non-answer.
About the journalists, it's really
Watch this
painful
part.
to hear, anyone that been losing his life
At
for,
your instructions.
no real purpose or nothing illegal way, and it's been painful for us in Saudi Arabia. We've did all the right steps of
To order him to be an
investigation,
alive?
etc. in Saudi Arabia, and we've improved our system to be sure that nothing happened like
Okay.
that, and it's painful and it's a huge mistake, and we are doing our best that this doesn't happen again.
How do you have a huge mistake where you order somebody to be unalived and dismembered. Like, that's a mistake. I feel like that's intentional. But that did not, as I mentioned, all of that happening at the White House yesterday did not stop the billionaire bros from dining with the prince last night as Donald Trump was basically announcing more finance deals with him. And to suggest that the Trump family has not in some way benefited from their relationship with Saudi Arabia, like Jared Kushner got $2 billion whole ass dollars, like during the first Trump administration. Like, they are making big money off of all of this. And so take all of that, what you just heard, with a grain of salt, because they are lying liars who lie. Now, I mentioned yesterday about Nicki Minaj going to the United Nations. We can now report that Nicki Minaj does not just crash out on, what appears to be drug-fueled rants, allegedly, but she is also now verifiably an international lying liar who lies. Rolling Stone reported in an article entitled, Nicki Minaj Spreads Misleading Information at the United Nations. Basically, Nicki Minaj said a whole bunch of shit that is not backed by any data, which is to say that she lied. Now, you all should read the article in Rolling Stone. They present it in very reader-friendly sort of ways. But she basically said, today, faith is under attack in way too many places in Nigeria. Christians are being targeted, driven from their homes, and killed. Churches have been burned. And she went on and on and on, basically talking about things that are technically, yes, that is happening to Christians, but she conveniently forgot to mention it is also happening to Muslims. This is not a Muslim against Christian attack. This is a Boko Haram terrorist organization and other terrorist organizations. And as someone pointed out in the YouTube comments yesterday, there is a big difference between what's happening in northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria. So we don't want to paint the entire country with a broad brush. But basically, Nicki Minaj embarrassed herself, embarrassed the whole nation, and is getting dragged for filth on the Twitters and on the social spaces, as she properly should. Let's move on to other sources of national and international embarrassment. The Epstein files, where Representative Thomas Massey, who's been really driving this effort alongside with the efforts of Ro Khanna, essentially just dropped the hammer on Mike Johnson. And they are talking about, in some of the conversation that we heard yesterday, where Mike Johnson is talking about the fact that he's going to push back and he wanted to amend the files or amend the legislation that was going to require the files to be released. And essentially, Tom Massey is like, you know what? The only person who would say something like that is somebody who benefited from this sort of abuse of power. And he essentially is calling out MAGA Mike Johnson. Now, as I said a little bit ago, the House Republicans, they passed this legislation, and the only person who voted against the legislation was a legislator from the state of Louisiana by the name of Clay Higgins. Now, I don't know what is motivating Clay Higgins, but we have seen some reports that there are people in Clay Higgins' camp who themselves are facing charges of being a part of pedophile rings or sex rings or other sorts of inappropriate type of activity rings. So I don't know. That's why Clay Higgins is the one member of Congress who was like, I'm going down on this Epstein ship. You all can bail if you want to. Epstein. But basically, he was the only one. Now, the House was told by the leadership, MAGA Mike Johnson, that don't you worry about it. We're going to send this legislation over to the Senate, and the Senate is going to amend it. They're going to take all the provisions out of it that we don't like to see. Here go the folks in the Senate. Chuck Schumer, again, who I have criticized a lot because he deserves to be criticized a lot. And I also get to criticize him because I voted for him because he is my senator and he was better than the alternative. Chuck Schumer orchestrated basically, it was not, I don't want to call it a Uno reverse, but he was like a skip you back to me sort of situation because he orchestrated a thing called unanimous consent, where basically the Senate was able to already agree that what we ain't finna do is mess with this legislation. Once it gets over here, we gonna send it on to the White House. We ain't even got time to deal with it. This is a veto-proof majority, basically. So the Senate essentially agreed 100% with the legislation as it was, and now that shit is making its way to Donald Trump's desk to be signed into law. It is insane to me that this is actually happening. Now, later on in the podcast that's going to come out later today, you guys are going to get to hear a clip from Representative Massey, who's talking explicitly to Mike Johnson, and I think it's important that you hear that in his own words. And you'll also be able to hear Massey talk about the fact that we fought the president, the attorney general, the FBI director, the speaker of the House, and the vice president to get this win. And the reason I think it's important for you to hear that clip, even though I don't have time to play it right now, is because they had the full weight of the American government fighting to protect the pedophile party. I think we should sit with that for just a minute. But what I also want you to sit with is something that I had been talking about extensively a couple of weeks ago. Remember when I said if it looks like a terrorist, walks like a terrorist, acts like a terrorist, it's a terrorist. If it looks like a slave catcher, walks like a slave catcher, acts like a slave catcher, it's a slave catcher. This conversation we're about to have is about ICE. Yesterday in Bloomington, we got a report that the Bloomington police had arrested 16 men in a sex sting called Operation Creep. 'Cause they creeps, yeah. And so as a result of that, the men who were being arrested were accused of trying to solicit solicit a minor for sex. But I want you to listen to this clip. This is a clip from the police who at the press conference who are talking about some of the people who were also a part of this arrest. And it just so happens that at least one of them was a member of ICE. Take a listen to this clip because it walks and talks and acts like a slave catcher, so it is one. Listen.
This one shames. This is a tragedy in many respects, but people at the Department of Homeland Security, I know there are great people there that come to work every single day and do their jobs and do it admirably. Unfortunately,
this one of them.
Mr. Recently married back here is not one of those people.
Recently married.
He works for ICE, and he is an auditor for them, a civilian employee. When he was arrested, he said, "I'm ICE boys." Well, you know, unfortunately for him, we locked him up. We put him in our jail. He got reappropriated to our jail, and my understanding is he helped send people to send federal authorities. I think he's going to see some federal authorities because I think the feds are going to take this case.
Everything you done to me, already done to you. Ooh, the news is newsing today. I told y'all the news was newsing. So listen, there's a lot that we had to cover, and I want to get into some of the economic news as well. I'm going to do this really, really quickly because, again, we got like 4 minutes before the show is supposed to start. I got to be live on air with my Urban View family. Now, according to new federal data that was released this week, companies announced 40,000 layoffs last month. 40,000 layoffs, which is more than, according to the report and more according to Facts Post News, that is more than any other October on record, and it is one of the highest one-month totals of layoffs in the past 2 decades. Other bad news coming from the Wall Street Journal. Goldman Sachs is estimating that October saw the largest drop in employment since 2020, which is the last time Donald Trump was in office. So every time Donald Trump has been in office, he has administered essentially the worst downfall when it comes to jobs, and we ain't even got a COVID situation happening right now. We're also learning that it looks as though the Donald Trump administration is refusing to sign any extension of the Obamacare tax credits as they're going to expire. There are a number of Republicans in swing districts who are hoping that this money could be extended so that people would not have to pay these triple, quadruple, quintuple increases in their subsidies if they're going to keep health care. And basically, they're not going to win that argument. The Republican Party has said, fuck you and your health care. Just don't get sick. You'll be fine. Go eat some of this processed food, which we no longer have people checking to make sure that it's not going to make you sick. But that's how Republicans do, because they're bad at leadership. Or should I say they lead like a Project 2025 reality would have them lead, which is to say they don't care about you. They don't care about your family. They don't care about the people that they serve. They care about the money, and they're going to get more money from the people who are essentially paying them to ensure that you are not going to have access to health care. So there's that. Also interesting to note, and we're going to have to talk about this more extensively later on, but commercial mortgage-backed securities. We'll explain this. It's basically what happens. You know how in the foreclosure crisis, what was happening was that a lot of people, once you got mortgages and once you got what was called a subprime mortgage, it was a mortgage that basically had like an adjustable rate to it. You might be paying $500 a month this month, but when them interest rates go up, you're going to be paying $700 a month next month. And that really is what helped to trigger a lot of the foreclosure crisis, because mainly banks were targeting Black and brown communities with toxic mortgage products that were designed to fail. It wasn't that Black and brown people was trying to buy more house than they could afford. It was that the banks were fucked up, and we know they were fucked up because they had to pay a whole lot of settlements. What would typically happen after you get a mortgage is that they will take your mortgage, my mortgage, Amina's mortgage, everybody's mortgage, and bundle them together. And they would sell those mortgages to secondary markets. And those secondary markets basically are exposed to all of the risk that comes if your mortgage is not paid. Well, what we're seeing and what we saw in the foreclosure crisis of the 2008, 9s, and 10s was that was happening at a massive scale. And so it triggered a closure basically of the entire financial market. We're seeing right now a record 11.8% for commercial mortgage-backed securities, which means office spaces, because all of these layoffs happening indicate that people aren't working, which means rents are not being paid in commercial buildings. This is going to be a real problem. And if I had time, I would share with you all another clip where Jasmine Crockett is basically ripping the Republicans apart. You're going to have to hear that in the podcast episode later on today. But essentially, between that and the fact that news about the economy and the fact that Fox News has basically said, fuck grandma's gift, you don't have to give her nothing. You'll also be able to hear that clip in the podcast. We're in a situation where the economy is tanking. Now, we don't have a whole lot of official data about it from the federal government, because what they don't like do is sharing official data right now, and that's why they shut down the government for damn near 2 months. But the economy is tanking. Save your money, save your coin, buy black only. That's our assignment. That's what we're doing this holiday season. We buying black. The only thing that should be going into the black and coming out the red and going into the black are black-owned businesses. Shout out to Curl Mix. I got my order yesterday. You know that they're struggling and going out of, maybe facing a going out of business sale. Funk Off, another black-owned company that does natural deodorants. I see that people are buying their products up. They might also be going out of business. Let's do what we can to keep these businesses in operation. And if we can't keep them in operation, let's at least do what we can to make sure that if they got to close, they're going to go out with a bang. We buy black, and that's all we buy. Good? Okay. All right. I got to go. We got a live show to get to, and I'm so excited to talk about Urban View family. I was going to say much more to come on the Lurie Daniel Favorite Show, but that's what I say to Urban View. Anyway, YouTube, appreciate y'all. Had to get this in. I know it was super, super fast. Use the speed controls, guys. You don't have to talk to me about how fast I talk. I know I talk really quickly. It's for your benefit. Trust me, because I got a whole lot more in than I typically should have been able to. Use the speed controls, slow me down, and pay attention. Read the news. Pay attention.